This is such an honor for me to introduce our students. So last year I had lunch with someone we all love and trust, Gloria Groom. And I asked her, Gloria, I would like to meet someone with vision. And with her signature generosity of spirit, I got to meet Dr. Suzanne Karr Schmidt. I think you all got her intro bio, academically, stellar background. And I'm a massive fan of yours because I went and got the book. I mean, she had contributed to this whole. She's the person to talk to on Ther. But today she's going to talk about textiles and pop-up books because all of us have an interest. And I have to say that there's no doubt about her academic credentials. What I love the most, she recently spoke to some of the children that I teach at University of Chicago, charter school second graders. She did this whole presentation on hieroglyphics and Rosetta Stone. At the end of class, there's about 50 second graders. At the end of class, whenever I have a speaker, what they're asked to do is write a letter to the speaker to thank them. And I shared them with Suzanne over the weekend. And uniformly, across the board, the letters said that they were so excited to learn something different and they wished that she would come back and that they loved her. Were I to ask all of you to write a letter to her after today's presentation, I have a feeling we'd be writing the same thing. It's with deep pleasure I would like to ask Suzanne to come and share with us whatever you like, because I just love everything that you talk about.
Oh, terrific.
All right. Well, then let me share my screen. Thank you so much, Shoma and Barbara, for allowing me to join your group today. Let's see. All right, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some works in progress. Can you see some odd books?
Yep. Yeah, right. Beautiful.
Okay, so basically I'm an art historian by training from Yale, but I did a very bookish topic. In fact, I was told at one point in the process that I'd never get a museum job working on basically the Renaissance pop-up book as a dissertation topic. And I've actually had many different museum jobs, but where I'm working now is at the Newberry, where I can buy a lot of books, a lot of prints, and I can put on a lot of exhibitions. And I want to talk about a couple of the shows really briefly that I've done in the past, the one I'm working on right now, which is the pop-up books, and then one other show that I will do someday, or maybe it's a book, I don't know. It could be just a really nicely illustrated book about printing on fabric. So sort of the most important show I think that I've ever worked on was when I was a Mellon Fellow, sort of a postdoc at the Art Institute. So I've been in Chicago for a long time, about like it's 2007. Yeah, and this is one, the Mellon Foundation not only paid for me to work there, but they also paid for a catalog for this great exhibition, which was about all the things that people did with pieces of paper in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. And I called it Altered and Adorned because I wanted you to really think about what you might do to change up the little piece of paper. You know, you write on it, you color it, you put some gold leaf on it if you want it to be really fancy. I don't know if you can see over my mouse, but there were prints in boxes. There's actually a 15th century Italian print, which I stuck on a Trader Joe's box that used to have caramels in it, because it was exactly the right size, which is sort of amazing that you had this roundel shaped print, and you could tell that was the kind of box it would have been on. It probably would have had sewing materials or something in it. You can see there I am next to some very big prints over here on the wall. And this is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's 6 or 7 across. So you could, so you see you can put the prints together to make them much larger. It's really very flexible. Yes, Shoma, there's a Ther over here that I helped buy. The men's bath, probably more male nudity than you'll see in one spot in the 15th century ever. But I'll talk about that another time. Here's a show I worked on at the Newberry. I'm just going to show you a little bit of the walking through it. This is a show that almost no one saw because it was during the beginning of the pandemic. And it does have a catalog, but I have to say, if I can, I will always borrow armor or a cannon for an exhibition, because if you put pieces of paper in context with the objects they relate to, you're going to have a much better time, because it's not just flat, it's not just books in a case, it's thinking about all the materials that you might want to use in the 16th century. So hold on. Okay, so can you hear me? Okay, I turned off the sound for a second. So yeah, so that was a wonderful show about technology and what the Renaissance thought they were doing in the 16th century by going to the Americas. It was about some prince that thought that Europe had invented the Americas, which of course they didn't, but they like to think about it. But today the main thing I want to talk about is the show with a title that's still very much in flux. I was calling it Movable Mayhem: The Art and Science of the Pop-Up Book. That was maybe a little too crazy. It didn't really explain what I meant. Why I was thinking about how dials and flaps tend to get taken apart. Sometimes people put them back together in bad ways. So you never know exactly if it's the way it used to be in the 15th century, because in fact, pop-up books do go all the way back to the 15th century in print, and then even further back before that. So what I'm leaning towards now is push and pull the movable magic of pop-up books. I don't know, does that seem fun for a show about books it's not going to be just kids books, it's all the way from the 15th century to now, and it's going to cover a lot of interesting ground, a lot of very theatrical ground. I think, Diane, you'll enjoy just how theatrical it's going to get. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. The video on the right here is a modern recreation of one of the earliest pop-ups, which is a dial that tells you when religious festivals are going to be. It was in a book from 1450 in England, and it's a manuscript on vellum that still survives. So here, take a look. Okay. So what's going on here is this little guy is a monk named Matthew Paris, who actually invented this dial. And what I really love about this recreation is that it looks like he's turning it. So all I'm doing here is opening the pop-up, right? So it's automatically just getting that little bit of move, little bit of give, as he goes back and forth as you open the envelope. So I don't know, maybe this is kind of appropriate for the Oscars tonight. We start off opening the envelope, but so I can't borrow a 1250 book from England. It's in Cambridge, but we can show this fairly realistic reproduction of it as a sort of a starting point of how important this one little circle that turns was to people, still is to pop-up bookmakers now. All right, so when I talk about early pop-ups, usually I'm talking about books that have moving parts, or they're called movable books by people in, say, the Movable Book Society, who I'm getting to know through my work lately. And so you have things like flaps, where you lift something and something new shows up underneath. They're dials that you turn, and maybe you're figuring out a code, or it's showing you something about astronomy. Say we could have lots of calendars that use that. And over on the right, there's a different sort of a sundial, which has this fun little string, which I added to the Art Institute copy. This is a piece of brass that you move the arm up and down, and it lets you set the calendar for different parts of the world. So I might talk about volvels a little bit. It's just a fancy name for a dial, basically. Volvel is to turn. So basically, we're mostly talking about things that don't literally pop up in your face when you open the book. That's basically what the 19th and 20th century idea of a pop-up is. But pop-up will probably stay in the title just because most people know what that means. So, but there definitely are surprises, no matter what the medium is being used here. All right, so that little Pope over there on the left is one of my favorite prints. in the world. It actually had a lot to do with my doing this topic for my dissertation. So that's the Alexander VI, and he's one of the Borgias, which means he was kind of a little objectionable to modern day terms, and objectionable at the time too, because if you lift this flap here, you see he actually turns into the devil. All right, very nice. 1560s Protestant Reformation, they didn't really like the Pope very much. I love that there's actually a little bit of gold up here and on the top half, on the tiara too. So there's really a lot of deception going on here. And if you couldn't understand all of this text about just how bad the popes were, I think you could get it from the image up here once you realize, oh wait, there's another layer. So this, I originally saw a black and white version of this in a book when I was in grad school. And that's how I ended up working on all of this, because I really wanted to see the original and see how many more Pope devils there were, basically. And I was actually a raised Catholic, so I say this with a lot of appreciation for the iconographies. All right, I did publish my dissertation as a monograph in 2018. You can see that over on the left. And one of my favorite things about this was that there was a space for a couple extra illustrations. Somehow I didn't use them all. And I decided at the very last minute that I needed to put in a copy of this Pope that readers could construct. So there are actually instructions in the book to cut up the book and put the pieces of the flap onto their correct place. So you can see here it is digitally removed. And if you want, you can put it over here. There is actually an online version you can do this too as well. So you don't have to cut up the book. Also, they made me say you should photocopy it or cut it out. The publishers weren't comfortable with saying, cut up this book. So there's also one of the cryptography dials as well in there, so you can have your own little set. And we can come back to it later, but if you see down at the bottom, I have the link if you want to try to build your own Pope is the Devil print. It's there free online. Anyway, so I'll just show you how you do it. So there's me with the book, and then a photo that strikes fear in the hearts of every librarian everywhere. And I have to say, I do not have a library degree, and I'm sorry, but I love this photo, even though it is a little frightening. It's my copy of the book. It's not the library's copy of my book. Anyway, so yeah, so there you have the scissors and the flap and extremely Renaissance era glue stick. Then you sew in the dial through the page, and then there you have the parts. So in the book, as it has become a piece of movable book art, you can turn the dial over here, and then you lift the flap. I actually put a little code in here, which basically says ego sum abbas, which is what was under there with the devil, and it says I am the Pope. So you can find out that that's what's going on here if you want. Yeah, so that was sort of fun, but let me get to the things that will actually be in the exhibition, because unfortunately I can't borrow that woodcut from Germany either. So one thing the Newbery has in spades is a collection of works collected by Edward Ayer that relate to the Americas and what Europe's interest in it. And there are 22 different copies and different editions of Peter Appian's cosmography textbook. And you can see 5 of them here. And the reason I like this is because there are 5 different moving instruments in this book. And the first one, which is over here, is from 1524. And it basically shows you how to navigate using the pole star. There's a lunar dial, which is here. You can also see 2 of the parts from another copy. So they don't always stay together. So I think in the exhibition, I'll probably pull out little pieces so you can see the sort of the backside and what's going on around with, well, why you would even want these many little pieces of paper sewn into your book. Yeah, this one's more of a sundial, tiny little lead weight from the 16th century that's helping you tell time here. I think I've only seen 5 copies in the world that still have this tiny little edition. So it's sort of like the bells and whistles. It's like you've got a really fancy zipper on this thing. This is sort of a more of a terrestrial map here, but you're seeing it from one of the poles. So I could have chosen from 22 different copies, but I'm hoping to put them in a long line down one of the walls and go from the earliest to the latest, 1524, 1609, and then all the languages it was printed in. There's Latin, there's French, there's no German, oddly, even Spanish and Dutch. So we'll get a really good sense of the publication history of this. Basically, it's a textbook showing you how to find your way in the world, but with fun toys. So that's just to give you a sense of the kind of depth we have in the collection to work from. And one thing we don't have, and the reason is, sorry, here's some videos that'll show you them moving. I should have gone to that already. Lunar dial over there on the right. You see how that's the phases of the moon. You can see how the moon gets bigger and smaller. Yeah, there's the moon. So yeah, so there's two other pieces, but the one thing we don't have though is Peter Appian's masterpiece, which is an enormous book. And this particular copy, which I'm hoping to borrow from University of Chicago, was briefly owned by the Newbery. It was part of a collection that they bought and then sold a few of the things to pay for other acquisitions. I think actually to pay for the purchase overall. They were trying to sort of make it work. But what's interesting about this is that it's about 112 pages, and it's much bigger than the ones I just showed you. Those are more like this big, and this is, you know, literally an elephant folio. It's so large. This is sort of the center, and you can see these draconian nodes relating to eclipses. This is another instrument, but they've got up to 5 or 6 different layers. They're beautifully colored. There are seed pearls on the colored threads. It's just an amazing object. And this particular one, as I said, did belong to the Newbery for a very brief time. Was owned by Tycho Brahe, the important 17th century astronomer, and apparently given to a student of his who he ended up having a falling out with later. So there's a lot of interesting stories about that. So I mean, this is a magnificent gift. It was called the Imperial Astronomy, and in fact, the Peter Appian who wrote it was knighted by the emperor at the time because he made such a beautiful book for him. I think he had some of his children legitimized out of this too, so it's, you know, a good deal for the whole family. But yeah, so I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, that we can borrow this back, and I'll try to be nice and make sure that we give it back to Chicago after the show. But you know, no promises. It's just the most beautiful thing. All right. Okay. So I guess the most sort of religious thing you can do with the imperial astronomy is calculate when Easter's coming. But you could also, one of my favorite other books at the Newbery is this book where you take a pilgrimage in the steps of St. Francis of Assisi. And it's really quite large also. And on the left, you can see how you could be a pilgrim yourself, walking along and imagining, you know, as a modern person in 1612, what it would have been like in the 14th century. You can see, so here's the pilgrims, you pull the flap down, there's the space with the cross where Francis, I guess, paused and meditated. But if you look on the right, here's another page where you can find one of his, one of the little caves where he spent time. So yeah, I got that little skull in the background, really reminding you of your mortality in this really clever way. So got be able to show one of those. I'm really going to try to break the show up into sections of dials and then flaps at first, and some of them get very mathematical. This one up here is I think what I like to call the pop-up Euclid, 1570, and you basically have the ability to make geometry three-dimensional because you pull up these little flaps and space them together so they look like the three-dimensional solids. We were missing actually most of our flaps, but this one is still together, so we were very lucky about that. And this one is English. And over here, one of my favorite people from the Renaissance, Albrecht Dürer, very famous artist, as you know, he did a couple of books for artists talking about skills they could learn. In this case, it's perspective. And you can see from these fold outs, little scholars are showing you where you have to look to see the perspective of these designs properly. And here's another one over here. This guy looks more like a soldier, I think. But I just love the way that there's just not enough space on the page. You have to make more room to really understand the concepts. And this is consistently in all the editions. So Durer really thought this was important. Also, I like the fact this is a partially hand-colored copy. So you can see there's a little bit of red peeking out on the robes here. And this guy has yellow hair. But yeah, it was fun though. This was a copy that we didn't know we had. It wasn't well cataloged. And I finally looked at all the Durers we had and realized there was another one on the shelf nearby. So, nice to see what you find in your closet. Okay, so Durer is always influencing what I work on. Here's his Adam and Eve, very famous 1504 engraving. Here's something else we're going to borrow, we hope, from the University of Chicago, is a anatomical broadside, I think, which basically, look, here's Adam. I'm pretty sure this is Adam again. So there's a lot of copying going on. Eve is missing a little layer or two, but you can see from the side here that it's just fanning out layer after layer after layer of anatomical information. And it would have been for students to try to figure out where all the bits go. And so you can see over here several internal organs that are made of paper and that were meant to come out and be put back inside so that you could, sort of pin the tail on the donkey, but with more of a dissection. So it was, didactic again. This is probably relatively expensive given the amount of engraving and pasting together that went into it. And I've tried to recreate these from photographs and have sent people copies of the files, and it's very difficult to make this without basically instructions or without copying an example. So I don't think anybody was putting these together at home. I think this was sort of a workshop thing, just like the big imperial astronomy we looked at. All right, so I know this is one of the cases where doing it yourself can be a little odd. So I don't know if you're all familiar with the Romance of the Rose, very famous medieval manuscript. We don't have a copy of that in a medieval copy, but we do have a 19th century one that was done in France of a manuscript, or done by a French artist, of a manuscript that was in the British Library. And there's a little trick to it. This is the title page on the left, and then there's a print of flowers, as you can see on the right, that was sort of stuck in the back. So not what one expects really in a medieval manuscript, right? I mean, it is about love. It is about access to the rose that is sort of the epitome of love. But they really went all in by putting these lithographs sort of behind the scenes there. So I think that's I think on the left was a copy of a Titian painting, Venus Turbino, but I'm not sure what the other one is from yet. But I just love that these were in there, and not only one but two different places in the same book. They really thought a lot of it needed a little extra oomph, I guess. So the question is, does this go with anatomy? Does this go in a naked picture section? Or is this about someone deciding to, do it themselves and add just a little extra information to this already beautiful manuscript? All right. There'll be some things that are quite topical in the exhibition. This is sort of what I think of as the Me Too moment of the collection. It's an 18th century trial in France in which a Jesuit confessor and his young female ward had some kind of a relationship, and both accused each other of witchcraft and coercion and rape and a number of other things. And so if you see here, there's a flap. This is the Jesuit saying mass, maybe not very well if he's putting his hand on a skull, but then you lift it and there he is sort of nuzzling in to a woman who's only partially dressed. So there was a big to-do about this trial in the early 18th century. It was a big deal. I think neither of them were. I don't think anyone was convicted. I think they decided there was blame on each side, but just the fact that there would be a interactive image made of the time really suggests it was very popular and people were really wondering how it was going to turn out. Okay, so here's the magical part of the exhibition. I had the luck to meet the late great magician Ricky Jay at one point when he had an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I visited his collection in Los Angeles, and he showed me at the Newberry a little later how to use some very unusual books that we had. So here it is. All right, you see it? Oh wait, it's flowers now. Nope, gone again. Did anybody get how that worked? So it's blank. Got some nuns, flowers, blank. So basically it's a tab structure. It's called a flick book or a blow book. And the bottom tab is basically all the blank pages have a tab at the bottom. And then you sort of go up one at a time, and it's a particular set of images interspersed evenly throughout the book. And I just love the fact that this is an 18th century basically magician's trick, and you can still use it like this. And I don't think I would have figured out how to do it quite as well if I hadn't had someone who knew how to do it show me, but it's just sort of wonderful. I just love that book, I have to say. There's a lot of theatrical imagery happening. By the 18th century, you have effectively a little burlesque theater show, a pantomime being put into little flaps like this, where you lower this and he hasn't seen the skeleton in the closet yet, which turns out to be literally Harlequin in disguise, etc. All right, well, so we really need to, so we're coming all the way up to the modern day. I'm going to talk a lot about how kids would have started using these only in the late 18th or early 19th centuries. And then we're going to make sure that everyone who comes to the show knows how to put some of these together, because I really want people to think about making objects like this. So we have two artists who are in the area. Sean Sheehy here has a Counting on the Marsh sort of environmentally informed numbers book. Those are mosquitoes, I rather like that. And then this carousel book by Hannah Batzel, which is just, there she is holding her book. This is a unique item that was made for the Caxton Club, actually. I just think is really beautiful, based on an existing important book to Chicago. So these two artists are going to be working on making a pop-up basically for us. And I went to the Movable Book Society conference in Denver in October, and basically the sheets over on the left pop out. These are die cut and become, in this case, a sort of literally a rocky mountain. We're not going to do that for the Newberry, but we might have a Newberry building pop up out at you. But I want people to basically be able to take it home and make it themselves. I think it's going to be really interesting. Yeah, so that was, oh, right. And then maybe my favorite thing in the whole show is that the way that these books are always in, sometimes they're in tatters. If people really use them, I mean, if you give them to kids, pop-up books are gone. They don't survive. But in the 19th century, people were worried about the happening to all books. So I'm just going to have one case that's full of unterrible books, or, yeah, here you go, unterrible, quite indestructible. You can see these little dogs fighting over a book, and here's a dog chewing on one and a parrot. So these are books mounted on cloth, on linen. So here these little kids are tearing the books apart, but you won't have that problem anymore if they are mounted on fabric. So I love this idea of trying to preserve the books, even if they're going to get written on. You see this little handwriting here by the people who are using them. So we can't preserve these if entirely in an immaculate state if they're being used, but we sure can have a lot of fun with them. So that was pop-ups, but because of those unterrible books, I thought it might be an okay little segue over into prints on fabric. And I've been working on this for a long time. Bought a few things with the Art Institute that relate to it, but I always had my eye on some books at the Newberry that, and some prints that were really very beautiful that relate to it. So I'm going to just show you a few things, and I want to know if you think it would be a good exhibition. All right, so these are all in European collections or at the, I think, at the Met, but you can see the variety of textures that are happening here. And what I mean by printing on fabric is not a repeat pattern. It's not like a toile where we'd use for furnishing fabric. It is usually an engraving or a single block, wood block that would have been used on paper normally. So it's like an art print that's been put on a more luxurious backing. So you can see there's actually some gold added here. There's a little bit over in this as well. This one is very reduced scale. It's just enormous. I mean, it is, I don't know, 12 feet long, something like that. This is the National Gallery in Washington. They do lend themselves to larger scale because you can have a much bigger piece of fabric than you necessarily would with paper. You don't have the same restrictions as a paper mold. But anyway, so I did talk a little bit about fabric in Renaissance invention because making silk from silkworms was one of the big inventions that was discussed. There's a whole other series though called Vermicericus about the life of the silkworm. So that's something that I've always found wonderful. We borrowed actual silkworm cocoons for the exhibition. You can see right there. And these are the 6 prints in the series that showed you the life of the silkworm. If anybody's interested, we have a whole module on those prints that's in our sort of time machine app online that I could send you the link for again later if you want. But this guy is just the most wonderful grumpy silkworm who has made it to the point of not being turned into silk, but actually surviving to produce the next generation. But she looks like she's just been woken up from a nap. I think it's just beautiful. All right, so I had to bring Durer in again. When I was doing the Altered and Adorned exhibition, I did have a piece of repeating fabric. You can see here, I think this is Italian. Maybe it's linen. I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but it does have a wood block. And that was a technique that went back to at least the 13th century that people were first writing about it. And I have this next to an Albrecht Dürer woodblock print because it had some what might be embroidery patterns, what might be but fabric related patterns. And it's a very famous series, and that's why those are together. All right. Why would you want to print on fabric? Well, here on the left is a copy of the print on the right, Albrecht Dürer, St. Eustace, which is quite a big print, actually. I mean, it's over a foot. For an engraving, that means you have a very large piece of copper that's being used to have all these fine lines. And the original plate was actually owned by Emperor Rudolph II. And he, I believe, had it gilded as an art object and kept it in his Kunstkammer, his cabinet of curiosities. So but he also had it printed on, in this case, sort of a cream satin. So we really wanted to have, both the gilded plate and the golden print coming from it. It's a little hard to see the texture right here in this particular photo, but I can show you more in a bit. I mean, maybe you can see a little bit up in the sky where there's a little more luster. All right, so there are collectors who collect very, very fine 17th century prints on paper, who are also starting to collect ones on fabric as well. And this is a Hendrik Holtzius, sort of a married pair, and their portraits are known both on fabric and on paper. And I think you can see a little bit more of the texture here. This is quite magnified, but you can see that the ink is really beautifully dark in comparison to the weave and shininess of the fabric here. So, I mean, they're really only a few inches high. They're not that big. All right, let me show you a couple of ones that I helped buy for the Art Institute. A couple of them are, or several of them are religious. On the left is a festival banner. I think it's 18th century Flemish, and it has the same image on the other side. So if you're sort of walking around in your parade with this on a stick, sort of either fanning yourself for a little air, or just enjoying the festivities, you can see it either way. The one on the right also has a function. It might have been a cloth for to cover the communion vessels. And what it is showing the deposition of Christ. So you can see that there's black printing on the outside, and on the inside, and that's probably engraving. This is French 17th century. And in the center, it's a different color. So they actually used a different plate probably and inked it with a different color separately, and then went in and painted those little dots where the nails were in red. So it's really a very complicated process. And because there's a little bit of tearing from over the years in the center, it kind of picks up on the edges. So it looks like the cloth is being shaken. So what it really looks like is like they're holding a cloth that is actually the Shroud of Turin. And it is actually a replica of a different shroud that was in the town of Loisy, which was kind of a competing contact relic. They like to think that theirs was also taken from the body of Christ, basically. And I believe that the original shroud was destroyed in the Revolution, so we don't have that anymore. But there were a lot of 17th century replicas of it, and this one I think was maybe the right size. It could have been used in a liturgical setting, but it's really a very beautiful object. And there were many more. The family seems to have only done prints on fabric, and a lot of them on this topic. All right, at the Art Institute, they've had that Rubens on the right for a very long time in the collection. We had a print on paper of this print after it, but I realized that it was also done on satin. So we were able to get this comparison to see the whole group. So it's a painting that's painted, I think in this case on canvas, and then a print on paper, and then a print on fabric. And this is of course reversed because of the printing process. But you can see a little bit in the way that the undulations of the fabric are moving, just how shiny it is. I mean, I don't have absolute detail there, but it's really remarkable. The scale is quite a lot smaller than this. I just wanted to give you a 1-to-1 to see the image. All right. This one, however, it feels like it's almost as big as a painting. It's a mezzotin, which is almost like the velvet painting of printmaking, where you have a plate that's been roughed up all the way around. And then if you printed it, it would print solid black. Then you go in and almost erase the areas where you want it to be white. So like the IHS in the center of this is St. Ignatius of Loyola there, looking very, very saintly. And so basically everywhere you wanted it to stay white or stay black, you would leave, and then all these little highlights, like these rays of light, would be burnished away into the plate. What this is actually a request for support for graduating with a PhD. It's actually called a thesis print. And all this text here is explaining what the student thought were the main points of what he was writing. And he's actually calling on the saint to support his candidacy. And I don't know who would have been the recipient of this particular print on silk, but it's I think almost a meter tall, maybe a little larger, and it's on this sort of off pink color, and it originally had a brocade along the edges, which was picked out. It doesn't have it anymore, but it may have been in a very ornate frame too at one point. So these are really objects for special occasions and just lustrous, and would have caught the light, especially with candles, in a really dramatic fashion. Especially with this one, the scale is fantastic. All right, I'm just going to show you a couple from the Newbery. Here's a really close-up view where you can see both printing with letterpress, and then this is woodcut probably, and then a drawing, a little illumination that's added to it. All right, so here it is. This is a wedding souvenir, and we don't really know very much about the couple other than they have their saints are Elizabeth and Peter are being called out here. You see Peter's key. And I don't know if all of the guests at the wedding received one of these on fabric. I mean, maybe they got one on paper, but there's definitely a lot of effort going into creating a poem about the event. So I need to find out more. But the publisher, Theodore Meyer, is very interesting to me because he also published a book around the same time that I bought in a silk binding. And of course, at this time, there's no guarantee that the publishers were the ones doing the binding, but the taste for this very lustrous fabric and a little bit of gilding is one that I find really interesting. And this is, I mean, there's sort of binding techniques are different than printing techniques, but you can use some similar tools to set up the ruling on the edges and so forth. Looks a little like a ballet slipper too, actually, with all the pink. There really was a vogue for this. This was another wedding, the 18th century, something I bought for the Newbury recently. You have these little roses picked out in paint all the way around, this little trellis. But inside you just have hand coloring on a printed thing. And you can see these little vignettes are very fine. But look at how deeply the ink is impressed into the satin here. I mean, I think it's really gorgeous, just the way that sits in there. I mean, I think it was probably very popular because it had this sort of heft to it and strong contrast between the materials. Very, 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 very luxurious. All right. I mean, you didn't always have silk. Sometimes you would have canvas used. And here on the left is an example of a whole book of Cicero dialogue being printed on linen. There was actually a Scottish 18th century publishing house that did a lot of that. And you can see over here in a different collection, there are some on silk in different colors as well that they published. So just to give you an idea of the range of materials that were being treated this way. All right, moving way more modern. This is from the late 19th century. You could also print in a way your images into the fabric. So this is actually a jacquard loomed book of hours from the 1889 World's Fair. It was French. You can see a little bit of the contrast between this gray silk and the black. There's a beautiful marginalia of a butterfly right there. I hope you can see that detail. But it's really trying to give you the exact format of a medieval book of hours with borders and with the way that the prayers are laid out and all these images. So this was something that we didn't have cataloged very well either. And there's one at the University of Chicago, but it's actually quite expensive to buy one now. They're very rare, especially because it has a connection to the development of early computing. Jacquard looms were used punch cards, and that was a similar technique that ended up being used for early computers. So a lot of collectors who are in the tech fields are interested in that, and so it's just wonderful to have that connection between the technology and this, and it's just a gorgeous object. So another favorite thing of mine is that we have a crazy quilt in the collection that has a number of different little printed elements, like this little lady coming out of the, I don't know, breaking through a surface here, these little kids, but just seeing the different applications for what could be a pretty niche technique, I find really interesting. And this is just gorgeous color. All right, so that's probably what I have for today. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of it. And yeah, please put your sound back on. And yeah, it's there's a lot going on at the Newbury. So I would be honored if you'd come visit if you can. Maybe when the pop-up book show is up or another time. Let me see if I can. Did I unshare? I'm not sure if I did.
No.
No, are you still seeing my
Yes.
screen? Okay, let me see if I can fix that. There we go. All right, now we can see each other.
I have a question.
Hmm?
So everything that you showed us seemed to be directed towards adults. But at some period in time, all those little things that you do with the book is much more, at least now, it's much more for kids.
Yeah.
You know, pop up and move it, and even actual pop-up books, even though they will destroy them, you kind of have to hold it and let them just look. But when did that changeover happen?
Well, you're definitely starting to see pop-up books in the late 18th century that have sort of adult and interest for kids, like the Harlequinades. I think because it's sort of recreating a show you might see in the theater, I think that's got a lot of crossover value. In the show, I have a couple of sort of astronomical books that are geared for both young ladies and young gentlemen. So that I'm pretty excited about. That's something that started in the late 18th century, but continues into well into the 19th. So you sort of his and hers kind of books. Sometimes you get things where it's a moral that's a little different for the girls than for the boys, and usually the boys get swords in theirs and the girls get makeup. So I'm with the boys on that one. But yeah, come on, lifting the flap of armor is much more fun. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of sort of tunnel books will give you a view of not just architecture, but of somewhere you might or might not be able to go when you're a child, if it's of a theater. So there's definitely some access there. We'll definitely have some books for kids in sort of the second section, but it's definitely not the main focus. And I don't know, I may have to put a little disclaimer on the case with the naked ladies, we'll say.
Where is that book catalog, by the way? I'm curious.
Which one? Well, that's, I mean, that one, the one with the two like naked lithographs, that's at the Newberry. I mean, we have that.
Which section? I mean, how is it cataloged?
It's under the Romance of the Rose manuscript.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's funny because I'd actually noticed one of them, and another, someone was using it for a class and they noticed there's a second one. So not everybody notices there's two in the book. The one on the front cover is pretty obvious, but that the bouquet at the back is very clever.
What a hoot.
Merle?
Earl?
I think
On that subject, just I'm embarrassed that this occurred to me, but in several centuries ago, was there some kind of tradition of pornography where things were concealed like that?
Oh, there's a huge tradition of courtesans with liftable skirt images. Yeah, we don't own any at the Newberry. I've been trying, but I haven't been able to get one. Yeah, Venetian usually. Although those are very interesting because it's really about revelation as much as titillation, because a lot of the women are wearing these extremely tall shoes called chopines, and usually for walking around puddles and things, and they're not the height you expect, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're wearing male undergarments. So there's sort of this question of what exactly have you found under there. There's sort of a gender bending experience going on too. So yeah, I don't know. I'm still looking for one of those. Maybe after we do this show, somebody will find me one.
Maybe
But,
that should be your title, pop up revelations and titillation. You'll get tons.
Ooh, I would get a lot of attention for that.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, what did you think of that second title? What did I say? Like push and pull, the magical, movable magic of the pop-up book.
when I hear the word magic, I think of something that is more infantile. I think of something that is more for children, and what I resist immediately is the acceptance of such a limited concept for something that can be so revelatory or opening up. It's another it's a way of making a two-dimensional concept a three-dimensional concrete. And it's not magic. What it is, it's revelatory. It absolutely gives in psychology, when you're teaching things like creativity and intelligence, you try to bring students into a world where they internalize, but at some moment it becomes real to them. And some of the exercises that are involved are like taking, let's see, what's one? Taking toothpicks and telling them that here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 toothpicks, and you've got to make 4 triangles. Well, the only way they can do it is taking, laying 3 toothpicks down on a table and putting 3 up. They've got to go into the third dimension. They've got to bring it. They've got to pop that object up to get to the number of triangles that you're getting them to create. And I think that this is something really precious. And I don't think it should not be put into the realm of magic. I think this should be something, how can you reveal the mystery of life? How can you reveal the act of creation? How can you open up the world to movement? I mean, this is such a wonderful idea you have that I don't think, I think magic really is not the right word at all. I would want something like pop-up, or even, I don't know if you have to call pop-up, but it's a movement. How do you explain, or how do you convey the underlying meaning? How do you show what's behind the surface? I mean, it's just, God, there's so much you can do with this. I mean, because I think it's a real wonderful addition to the world of learning and experience, regardless of the age. Regardless of the subject matter. I mean, it could be, my God, it's mathematics. Holy cow! This defines the whole science. And then you get into decorative things. I mean, it's just, you could just go wild with it. It's a great. Please don't use magic.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't know.
that's my opinion.
Yeah, the only thing we really have in the show is that the couple of the tunnel books, which is basically like a box you look into and you see a 3D effect sort of moving back in space. That's one thing that I think sort of works that way. But the flick book, that sort of glow book where you see it appearing and disappearing. I mean, that was an important centerpiece, but it's not the whole story. So,
I understand what Michael is saying. I think for me, a lot of what you showed today was sort of an archaic virtual reality. And Michael's talking about dementia.
That's a great title.
Yeah, and to my mind, just saying Renaissance pop-up book, I'm sold. What is that?
Me too.
Like,
Oh, wow.
the word Renaissance pop-up book so much better than magic. It implies all the mathematics and science and culture that Michael's talking about. I sort of I don't think you need to gild the lily. Renaissance pop-up books to my mind, it says it all.
Yeah, I'm not sure it says it all to everyone, but you're clearly the target.
Oh, I don't. What do I know? I know nothing. I just think, for my 2 cents, that the word Renaissance has got all the power that you're trying to get with other adjectives. I think it's already there with the word Renaissance. I wouldn't put Renaissance and pop-up book together and then you just wonder what sparks the mind. What is that? What could that
I have to know. I have to find out.
Yeah.
No, I guess I had dates in there at one point, and it just you can only put so much information in a title, so it sort of fell by the wayside. But no, that's a good point, because I know a lot of people really don't understand that pop-ups go back that far.
Penelope?
Well, 2 things. I mean, the first is magic, and maybe it's my narrowness of my addiction to works on paper, that there is something, if you think about paper, and it's essentially a boring material, and it's flat, it's two-dimensional, and what's interesting about it are the words that are written on it, or the images that are designed on it. But what you're showing to me and is a kind of magic of what can be done with the paper, that it can, tell that it can be a prediction of the cycle of the moon and things like that. And that you do it so that it's movable and it becomes something entirely different. That for someone who's focused on the paper, the limitations of paper, what you're showing is magic. What I have trouble with is the term pop-up book.
Yeah.
Because that immediately conjures up children's books, or things that are showing a palace or something like that. It seems so modern. I hear what you're saying, that people don't realize that people were manipulating paper into the third dimension a long time ago. But pop-up book itself leads me to kids. And I think, why do I want to see that?
Sort of the balance there, yeah.
Oh,
I feel like for a couple of, nobody will know what it is if I don't say pop-up. No.
Is there another word? Is there any other word for that kind, for books that have manipulated pieces of them?
Movable books. Yeah.
Movable books. Movable books does a lot there.
But I think
there's a lot of fans of pop-up, though. There's a lot of fans of pop-up.
Yeah, and we do want to get people to come to this show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hoping we'll be allowed to even touch things by then. We're hoping to maybe have some labels where you have to lift and turn things to read it, and have the whole show be really interactive.
Where do Advent calendars come into pop-up?
Oh.
Well, it seems like it's something very similar to Biedermeier style Valentine's almost. I think it comes out of Germany, which has nothing to do with the fact that I prefer Rittersport calendars if I can get them for Advent. No, I mean, it definitely has a opening the flap and seeing what you get kind of thing. It's a surprise. Yeah, it totally relates. Yeah, we actually have a good collection of Valentines as well that have pop-up components. So probably throw a few of those in there to see. We actually have enough of these 19th century ones that I could show them, closed and open. So I think as much as I can show the before and after, that's one of the tricks of this is we'll be able to do some video, but you won't be able to see everything in motion, especially not when you're looking at it right away. So you're going to lose some of that activity. But I think we can make it fun though.
When you're creating an exhibit and you get to use video for something that is pop-up in 3 dimensions, do you structurally, do you show it first in video and then show the original? I'm trying to think how this should be staged.
Well, the Newberry space has basically 2 galleries for the larger exhibition. So there's a smaller introductory space and then a larger one. And we're thinking we might have a video in the first gallery showing a variety of them in motion. That might be where we have that sort of explosion of activity happen sort of in the corner after you've read the introductory. What is a flap? What is a dial? Why is the Buffalo Bill pop-up panorama so racist? That sort of thing. There's some very interesting.
Cover it all.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Cover it all.
If resources were unlimited, and I realize that's a big if, but what would be fun, building on Barbara's point, is having the interactive ability on a touch screen to be able to manipulate how you take things out and how you twist them.
Yeah, no, it would be really good to have some of that
Because then you could simulate the experience without touching the original.
Yeah, I'm hoping to work on a project about sort of scientific Volvels that are in books at the Adler as well. We're going to be working with them on some programming. And they have some really wonderful astronomical examples. But I think eventually we'll try to get some usable online Volvels. It really hasn't been done in a consistent way. And it's very hard to, model that basically. But yeah, it'd be great to do. I think we might actually have a number of physical facsimiles in the space, so people can move those. We're definitely going to have a section where there are basically destructible copies of some modern things, so people will be able to go in there and use those as much as they
I love the concept of destructibles.
Yeah.
So well, I just figure, they won't last the show, so why worry? Let people do what they need to.
Diane, earlier on, you were indicating you wanted to jump in.
Oh, I think I asked my question, but you know what? I was just thinking, as far as the title, what if you just said Renaissance pop-up books? And then was it Joseph that said an archaic
virtual reality?
Virtual reality.
I love that.
I do too.
I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely.
If you can have that much, I don't know, it may be long, but it kind of is something for everybody there.
Pop-ups are a real category. I mean, people know, that frames their expectations. I like that. That's good. And the archaic brings in the time element, which is really introduces history and the theme. Now, if you could just get something in to give the reveal aspect, the opening up aspect. I totally agree. I think I love that, huh?
The modern mind gets that virtual reality.
Right.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Joseph, were you going to say something?
I think that's interesting.
I love it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, your talk is really a pleasure just a pleasure. But one of the reasons it was is because you were funny. You were funny at several places. I just laughed out loud. What you were saying. And I don't know how you weave that in an exhibition, but it was a kind of joy that obviously you love what you do so much. It's just you're so involved in it that there's a very full psychological approach to what you're doing. But if you can bring that just liveliness that you have for the subject matter anyway, as well as I think, again, back what Mike was saying, I don't know how your exhibition, because I got this all from your talk, how did these books change the way they think? Like, certainly if you can see a Ptolemaic thing, now I get it, but how it actually, beyond being a decorative, fun, hilarious thing, subversive kind of thing.
It changes your experience.
Yeah, it changed the way you think. It was a bit of a trip, but how it actually serviced, and also even why do we want that all the time? Why does our human mind actually appreciate and benefit and take such delight in it? But it's sort of an overlooked learning modality that we always sort of are striving for in a way. Anyway, I just thought it was a great talk, and the liveliness with which you presented it all. If you can present it that way, it'll be a great exhibition. I'm gonna go.
All right, I hope so. I'll do a tour, whatever you all want.
You bet.
Okay.
The Salon comes for a visit.
Great. No, I mean, we only have. I think we're currently at 50 word labels, so there's only so much you can pack into that. But
what if they're hyphenated words?
Makes it easier. Yep.
But, hyphenate everything.
Yeah, no, I always wrote definitely slightly longer ones at the Art Institute, but I what I always thought of them, the work they should be doing is to make you look at the object again. I think there was one rather rude landscape in sort of the Bruegel school, so kind of, you know, peasanty and weird, but I think it was slightly apocalyptic, but and there were these sort of volcanic things happening in the background. And I think at one point I described one of those as an image with irrepressible flatulence or something, you know, to try to, you know, what reader who makes it that far in the label cannot go back and look at the thing. I mean, it's just, you have to look again to see where that is. I try to make people, you know, have the urge to look. So I don't know, I'll do my best. It will probably be far fewer objects than are on my current list, but there even are some things that'll be on the walls. So we'll see. It'll be a really interesting mix of materials. When I did a small exhibition on this topic back in grad school at the Beinecke Library, actually, and that was only up to through the 17th century. So it's been a challenge to move up to the 20th century for me, but or 20, what are we in? Anyway, you know, up to we might even have something from 2023 in it. So so I'm excited about that. Shoma?
You know, it's telling that I'm so quiet. I swoon. I just don't want to talk practically, because I want to hear every single word that you say. I'm practically in love, but that's seriously, Gloria Groom gave me a gift. Every time I hear her speak, I get silent. It's amazing. If you ever go to a Twitter feed, it's a rabbit hole you do not want to come out of. And the generosity of spirit of what you share, it's amazing. But I was gathering what Joseph and Diane said, and something what Michael said. What is it that we get? The experience of seeing it. It's, first of all, it's beautiful. And I think, you know, the Renaissance already attests to the fact that it's, if not archaic, that it's not of this time. So if it's brevity that you're looking for, to me, I think it's beyond virtual reality. Like our idea of virtual reality, you know, is technology is so beautiful or so wonderful. No, it's not. I mean, to me, this old world, go back to it. It's just so inviting. So perhaps, you know, this Renaissance pop-up book, because I think it was Michael and Jack that says it's important to show it's a category. And like Diane said, that pop-up, there's a huge fan following. Clearly, this is pop-up book, perhaps beyond virtual reality or something like that. I mean, the titles you come up with, I read your stuff. I mean, they're hilarious. Irrepressible, what did you call it? Irrepressible, yes. Whatever it was. I mean, you're spot on with it, but that it's beyond this idea of our virtual reality. I find all this Facebook virtual reality stuff boring and dumb. This is timeless. I mean, I don't know, this to at least, I don't know, just come back. I can see why the students wrote, I love you, come back again. I mean, I just want to write you a letter and say, do come back every time. It's wonderful. Thank you for doing this. I loved it. And I've seen your work and I still love it every single time.
All right. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate running these ideas by you. And it's, you know, it's always, I never know how some of these wonderful objects will strike people, and it's always, I love hearing.
Well, this is a wonderful group in terms of brainstorming. So we can always, and there are a few missing, but we can always convene the group again if you need or want our help.
Hey, I got a question. I sometimes say to people like Madhu and others, like, you know, you've got a peach job in the art world. You know, there's like 7 of them. There's not a million of them, you know?
No, there's not.
So I wonder, in your rather specialist profession, I mean, I don't know internationally how many peach jobs there are, but it kind of seems like you got one. Or if not, is there a plum job in your profession that everybody wants to be the Louvre print curator or something? Is there some, I'm just wondering, in your profession, which you must know very well because you advance it. Am I right that you've got a pretty peachy situation for someone with your skills? And where else would be a great place to be?
I think Chicago is pretty great. Been here for a while.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there are collections that have you know, stronger acquisition budgets and, you know, deeper collections in some areas, but I think we have an unusual mix of working with scholars as fellows, and we're doing a lot with exhibitions, more than
How
we
many
had been.
exhibitions have you curated?
Oh geez, well,
Oh geez, come on, what a career.
Many more at the Art Institute, because I took over the hallways on the second floor, and that was yeah, actually, Barbara, I think I put up some prints that of the Mezzotins of the Sultans that you donated. Those are beautiful.
No, it's
Beautiful
not
prints.
every curator that just does a million shows like that and has the special. It's really great. It's what a pleasure to meet you and to be introduced into your field of specialty. Your love for it really shows. But
Well, thank you. Yeah, let's just say I do as many exhibitions as people will let me.
But that's kind of possible in Chicago more than other places, maybe. Oh, that's what I meant.
I think there's some leeway, absolutely.
I would like to interject something though. You're too humble to point it out. There is a reason. When I asked Gloria Groom, I want to meet a person with vision. That's a huge clue. There isn't too many people like her, full stop, anywhere. I mean, you're too humble to point that out. I mean, Merle, I should really thank you for this, because Merle taught me, you need to find people with vision. I didn't quite understand what that meant when you told me this years ago. And if Merle tells me something, whoever tells me in the salon, I pay attention. There is, to say that you're singular, Suzanne, is an understatement. I really, really strongly suggest people look up her work and what she does. This is just a drop in the bucket of what that mind of hers does. There really isn't any job is plum that she does. I don't know how to express this correctly. There is no one quite like her. It's not my opinion piece. That is something that we all respect deeply. Gloria Groom, that's the name she gave. And Gloria has a curated mind beyond belief. She suggested her name, deservedly so. And it's really, I'm going to say politely, not everybody who has authority and the ability to do stuff recognize what they have. I'm truly lucky I got to meet you, but it's a damn shame that I had to meet you this way. You're like no one else I've ever met.
Well,
How do you like them apples?
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, you deserve it. I can't come close. There's a reason I'm deathly quiet when you show up.
And I have to jump in for a minute because one of our salon members who couldn't be here today once said about Shoma that she'd like to spend an hour in that mind of hers. So to get the compliments you're getting from Shoma, glorious.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty speechless every time I get one of those. So thank you.
thank you so much. This is wonderful.
We have a story, and I'm going to let Merle tell the story. I get to use a word that my dad taught me, eleemosynary, meaning charitable. Don't get to throw that into a sentence often. But Merle and I decide to be good people, clean our closets, and contribute to the well-being of individuals in the Ukraine. Merle, take it from there.
Well, at the salon a couple of weeks ago, I think I mentioned that for some reason, I felt very connected to these refugees, and I wanted to do something beside give money. And I did some research, and I really couldn't find a vehicle for transferring goods. And Barbara did some Googling, and she came up with a shipping company / charity that's owned by Ukrainians that's sending goods to the refugees, whether they're in Poland or Moldova. And I think that link was sent to everybody in the salon. So I took it seriously. And for 2 years, I've been leading a fairly lethargic life, mostly in my house. And somehow or another, this just revved me up, and I went through closets and the backs of cupboards and drawers. I put together, and I think I sent an email to the salon saying, I now have 2 boxes. I'm going to go if anybody wants me to pick up your boxes. Yada, yada. So anyway, the place that this shipping company has, which is on West Irving Park, was overwhelmed. So they were delegating as a second drop-off point in the Ukrainian village, the Ukrainian Cultural Center. Fine. And they were receiving goods Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursday, 5:30 to 8:30. Oh, that's fine. So Barbara let me know that she had some boxes. I said, fine, we'll go Wednesday. And if you recall, pouring rain. So we talked and we said, okay, let's go tomorrow. It's still raining, but at this point, we both have all these boxes and we just want to get them out of our house. Load up my car, backseat, trunk, everything. We pull up to the Ukrainian Cultural Center, and on this huge glass door is a sign as big as the glass pane that says, do not leave boxes. We no longer are collecting.
Oh, no.
So we decided that maybe we could get some other opportunities by questioning people in one of the Ukrainian restaurants. So we went across the street. We went across the street and had dinner at a Ukrainian restaurant that the decor was so perfect. I mean, we really felt like we had been transported to somewhere in Eastern Europe. And the waitress, who probably was fairly new in the States, spoke marginal English, but we managed to explain we have a car full of boxes and we're looking for a place to drop them. And she gave me a piece of paper with an address, and it in fact was the Ukrainian shipping company / charity on West Irving Park. So we went in a circle. Now, I'm not necessarily impatient about research. I'm pretty good at just sticking with it until I find what I need. The next morning,
Merle,
okay, you want to talk about dinner? Go ahead. Go ahead.
We hop across the street for dinner. And I'm laughing because it was among the worst meals I have ever had in my life.
Perhaps you should stop recording this part. Just FYI. Maybe stop recording that part.
But it had all the echoes of my Jewish upbringing, but I'm looking at a potato latke, tasting it and going, you consider yourself a latke? My son-in-law does a better latke. It was an evening like that. Anyway, back in the car, and it's the next day.
And meanwhile, I have totally the back seat up to the roof and the whole trunk filled with boxes, and I would like to be able to have them gone. So the next morning I get online and I'm Googling every conceivable thing about places to donate. And I think what I've concluded is we're still new enough in this horrible invasion that there aren't a lot of infrastructure options if you want to donate. So I called that shipping company just to start, and they're so overwhelmed, they put you into chat, and the chat kept me on hold for 45 minutes. I've never had chat keep me on hold before. Okay. It turns out that they've stopped collecting goods in Chicago. They're just overwhelmed. However, if you wanted your own expense to ship boxes to New Jersey, they will then put them on a ship or an airplane, and they will charge you $2.50 a pound. And you have to pack all of the boxes by category and mark with very specific instructions on the outside, which is in each box. I mean, I think they're getting organized, but all of this is after we put multiple categories in different boxes and what. Okay, fine. So then I'm thinking of other possible options. I'm Googling all kinds of stuff, getting nowhere. So it turns out in Chicago, which is the second largest Ukrainian population in the country, we have 3 cathedrals. So I called all 3 to see if they had any programs. The first one told me there's a school and there's some new immigrants and the children need pencils and paper and crayons and that sort of thing, which is great. And I'd be happy to do it. But in the meantime, I've still got 9 boxes in my car. So I go on to the next cathedral, similar thing, the next cathedral. No, we're not doing any of that. But I said, is it possible that some of the refugees will make their way to Chicago and they'll need clothes and they'll need pots and pans and all those things in the boxes? Well,
Yes.
it's possible, but we don't know yet what the US immigration allowances will be. Fine. So this is going on now. We're like 2, 3 o'clock on Friday. And
Your car is still full, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm really impatient about Googling. I'm very good at research, but this was beyond me. So I called Barbara, I threw up my arms and I said, look, this is what's happened. Why don't you try calling that man who talked to the Salon, who runs the Jewish organization, or anybody else?
Ambassador.
Right, or anybody else you can think of. So I turn it over to Barbara, who did her research.
I get in touch with Lonnie and he says, I wish I could help, but our organizations are active in trying to save people's lives, get them out of harm's way. I forget who else I got in touch with, but then I figured what's really easy? Salvation Army. So and my wonderful assistant had done some research, and this is for future if you ever need it. She found an organization that gives clothing and pots and pans to help set up sort of halfway house people who have gone through addiction counseling and now they're on their own. So that's something to file away.
Oh, in the meantime, while Barbara is making those calls, I got some other brainstorms and I started calling universities. I got the idea because I have a cousin at Northwestern who works in Jewish studies. And I said, do you have any thoughts? And there's a professor there who's from the Ukraine. So he's now out making phone calls and Googling and trying to find this. I mean, it's a web that is vast, but not yet fully formed for this crisis. Anyway, Barbara and I concluded that as long as all these goods go to some good cause, then maybe it's just okay to give it to the Salvation Army. So yesterday morning, I pull into the Salvation Army and the place is packed. I mean, there are so many cars. They're 3 wide and around the block. But anyway, my car is now empty. I hope that the items that I've donated and Barbara's donated find good homes and they're useful and they're not just going to be thrown out. But I have to tell you, as a side, as much as I hope there is use in these things, it's been a wonderfully, what's the word I'm looking for? A restorative process for me to have gotten to empty out so many cupboards and shelves. And I mean, I'm a hoarder or a quasi hoarder by nature, and I got rid of so much detritus in my life. It was great.
The editing process was interesting because, as you all know, I collect a lot of Indian textiles that are made into lovely outfits for galas. And as I'm going through, no, they don't need gala clothes, right?
No.
Do they need shawl? No, they don't.
I was like, wait, what? I need your shawls. I'm like, wait.
No, I'm not talking about the good shawls.
I'm like, no.
No, I would, but it was fascinating what you decide is appropriate.
Well, one of the things that surprised me is when I started thinking about it, it wasn't just a matter of clothing. I got the idea that if I were left homeless and I had to run out of my apartment quickly because I heard a bomb alert, what would I take? And there's a lot of things I just wouldn't think to take. So part of what I wrapped up was personal toiletries, hygiene products, all those things that we have in a medicine cabinet that might not make it into an emergency suitcase, you know? The things it gave me a lot of pause to think about what we take for granted.
Yep.
I'm wondering why Merle and Barbara didn't think to call Penelope, who is our national Googler.
Well, actually, Penelope and I had a bit of an email exchanged early in the process.
Barbara?
Well, I have partly because as also, I don't think I'll even bother with quasi hoarder, although you can get through my apartment. And as one of my friends, as long as the EMT guys can get in the front door, it's okay. But I have, a while ago, I'd ordered some dairy crates from Crate and Barrel. And I was in the middle of the pandemic and I didn't want to go. So for whatever it was, not much, they shipped it. 1 dairy crate per box. So I have a stack of brand new, absolutely clean, perfect size boxes for packing with this kind of stuff. So file that if we need it.
I am.
What we need is Jose Andres with this different focus. He absolutely lambasted the United Nations and the EU for not being on the ground, not having boots on the ground doing things. And you should have read their responses. They were just weaselly.
Lame,
You know,
very lame.
The reason that he exists is, you know, he said people need water and they need hot meals, period. And he figured out how to do that, while FEMA in the hurricanes was saying, oh no, what do we organize to get water down there? How should we distribute the water? He had it to people for one reason or another. We need a Jose Andres to be delivering that, because you're right, Merle. People need, by the way, their list, even on that, but they said, by the way, new things. That's all they wanted was new things in the list that we had from the organization originally. And that's ridiculous.
I missed the word new.
Yeah,
I did too.
I figured that, but it says new, and I
How
saw
does
that.
like new work? It contains the
Well,
word.
Or sorta.
If I were, God forbid, in the place of the people who are escaping Ukraine, you see them come through the border with a carrier bag, with a plastic bag. They have
Or a
nothing.
roller bag.
Would I be happy to have clean t-shirts, by the way, I have a lifetime supply of t-shirts never worn from the Newberry Library Book Fair. No, I would think that would have a certain cachet in places. We need someone who can gather and sort and do that kind of thing. And now I'm thinking that's ringing a bell, but I don't know what it is. I'll have to figure that one out.
Salvation Army does that.
Yeah, you need to have people who can go through and see what's useful where. But Salvation Army, I don't believe, is in Ukraine or Poland.
So,
Now, the International Red Cross is. And, you know, what I think we need actually is one of the things about organizations like World Central Kitchen or the International Refugee Council Committee, all that, IRC and HIAS, they know how to do this. Doctors, they know how to do this.
Well, they have a blueprint, and wherever they have to go, they know it's all laid out.
Whereas the dance company in Ukrainian village had, and the shipper haven't a clue. By the way, Barbara, instead of March and Munch, this sounds like Donate and Dine.
Very good.
But, you know, but we need to figure out someone who knows how to do this, and is not just, you know, there are people all over. If you Google where to donate things,
Penelope, the key is for this particular emergency, except for the food resources. There really isn't a place yet. I think between all of us, we would have found it if it existed.
Oh,
think the
yes.
problem is we haven't, it will be, excuse me, through one of those big organizations that it knows
Yeah.
how to do the blindfolded.
Right.
Yeah,
Shauna?
I'm sure, but I don't think it's quite there yet.
Barbara, sorry, could you stop recording for a second? I want to share something that I'm super excited about.
Okay.
I told you